Welcome to the Omnigamers Club podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including spending your entire lunch break at school debating whether Batman or Superman would win a pie eating contest. I am Daniel Winter.
And I'm Mark USA. Hello.
How are you, Mark?
I am okay. It's been a trying week of technical issues all around. So
Yes,
we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
We do have a nice long weekend here, though a lot of that is set up with my daughter getting ready to go to school for the first time. So exciting days here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to send both of my elementary school age children back to school so they get out of my hair for at least 6 hours a day.
I bet. Yeah.
That'll be nice.
Excellent. So yeah, if you are listening to this episode, chances are you already know a lot about our technical issues this last couple of weeks. But just to be just for full disclosure, Mark, did you want to explain what's going on there?
Yeah, I'll try and give the shortest possible version of it. But basically, the service that I was using to create the RSS feed for this podcast, what originally started as a podcast, they just deleted our account. And it was so strange. The service is called Podcastix. We've been using it for nigh on 3 years now, and we've only paid for 1 month of service. Like, we used it for free for a year and a half. We used it for a month, mostly just to try out the analytics functionality. Canceled it a month later, and then we were still able to use the service for another year and a half, something thereafter. And they're like, "Oh, sorry, you didn't pay up, so we're going to delete your account." And this was so infuriating. The last thing that so frustrated me so much is they said, I asked if they could restore the feed from a backup if we paid. And they said, "We sent you an email about this. We just had to delete it because we can't support you for free." And I looked at my emails. There's nothing there. Just the only things there are saying, "Your episode is published. Your episode is published. Your episode is published." Everything's fine to me. So they just basically are bad. And we needed to find alternative services. So if you're still seeing us on YouTube, that's fine. No problem there. And if you found this feed again, I suspect you probably had to subscribe again. Because I checked the old Apple feed on my podcast app, and it was showing up as an entirely different feed. So
Spotify at least will need to definitely resubscribe. So and I will say, I'm guessing what few reviews and comments we probably had, or ratings I should say, have probably also disappeared. So as always, much appreciated if you could leave a rating and review if possible, especially as we rebuild from scratch.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to build up a whole new following there. So, hey, we just do this for love anyway. So
yeah.
If you're listening, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And still no ads to worry about here. So, we're just doing it for the love of the game.
There you go. Speaking of which, let's talk about some games.
Yeah, well, just one game, actually. So this is one of our featured game episodes. So, Mark, what is our game of the episode?
Yeah, it's been a little while, actually. It's been like 4 straight playlists, so I'm just getting back into the swing of this thing. But we are talking about not just a game, but we're talking about a whole game system. So many entries into this series. It's called Unmatched, originally published or republished in 2019, and it's based on an even older game that came out even before that. So you want to tell us who makes Unmatched?
Yeah, so the design of that original version was Rob Davio and Justin D. Jacobson, published by Restoration Games and initially by Mondo Games, previously known. They do a lot of posters and puzzles and other sort of movie ephemera largely. That collaboration is now a little more uncertain after 3 degrees of acquisitions. I think Mondo has unfortunately gone in the way of the Funko, but they're now solely published by Restoration Games.
Yeah, the older version I was referring to was the game Star Wars Epic Duels.
So this is a remaster of that. Yeah.
Right, a re-implementation, because that's Restoration Games' whole thing, is to kind of redo older defunct games from the past eras and to remake them for a new generation. So that's what Unmatched is.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that Star Wars game. It does seem like a pretty rich area to explore. The sort of the head-to-head battles would make sense.
Right. I wonder what those old sets play like. Probably good enough to attract the attention of Rob Davio.
Yes. Well, I
All
should
right.
say we will be sort of framing this conversation a little bit in light of a newer version of this, sort of a not quite a sequel, a sort of a sidestep in the Unmatched universe called Unmatched Tales to Amaze. This is the new standalone but semi compatible cooperative version of Unmatched, and that is designed by Jason Hagar and Darren Reckner.
Right. And this game has so many entries in it. We said it came out in 2019, but different sets seem to come out all the time. Of course, I haven't played all of those sets. I have played about 3 or 4 of them, though, so I can only talk about my perspective from the fighters and sets that I've played. But I'm impressed by the sheer variety of game mechanisms and characters that they've brought, and all of them, all the expansions are said to be compatible. So
Mm.
we even played a version of the newest set with some fighters from older sets. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So before we get too much into the weeds there, why don't we do a quick description of this game? I was just watching the Shut Up and Sit Down review of this, who proudly described this game within one breath. I don't know if we're going to quite that succinct, but let's quickly run over how this game plays.
Yeah, that's right. The rules for this game could not be simpler. Well, first of all, it's played with miniatures on a very small board, and quite often the sets will have you facing one-on-one between one fighter and another fighter, although different sets will allow you to play with multiple characters. Say, you might have one main character and then their sidekicks, one or more, or you might have multiple heroes. In the case of one of the sets I played recently, which was the Jurassic Park Velociraptor set. So in that case, there were 3 heroes, 3 dinos. So you're playing on these little maps that have these kind of connected node points, and the node points are connected by these lines, and the nodes might be connected to multiple lines, and then that determines your sort of line of sight. A map is divided into 3, 4, 5, 6 different regions based on the shading in the background of those node points.
It is a very abstracted map, right? I guess this isn't a grid we're talking about. These are nodes that are in a very uh, uneven sort of layout and asymmetrical sort of spread around the board.
Yeah, it's quite cleverly done. It actually makes the line of sight determination very, very clear, and that is kind of like a scary term from the tabletop skirmish and wargaming milieu. But in this case, they've made it very simple. Anything with the same color background of the space you're standing on is something you can hit with a ranged attack. And if you're talking about a melee attack, you can only hit something that's in the next node over from you, connected by one line. So dead simple. Got melee attacks that are close and ranged attacks that are far. And then why don't you tell us about other things the characters can
Yeah,
do?
I mean, you're rarely even having to like count distance away, right? It's either you're in the same zone or you're adjacent or you're not, basically. So yeah, you have your fighter or fighters with a number of hit points, usually somewhere between 10 and 15 or so. And you've got a deck of cards that you're working through that have either attacks or defenses or schemes, I believe is the final
Right.
action type. And so all of the actions come down to 3 options. You can draw a card and move. You can play one of those scheme cards that will let you manipulate the board or move around or do some funky sort of very hero specific things, or you can attack if you're within range of an opponent, and that is playing an attack card, and then your opponent may or may not play a defense card, and you sort of compare the abilities and the stats on those, see what damage happens. So very, very elegant combat system, and last man standing wins.
Yeah, and that draw and and move action is called maneuver, I believe.
Mm.
And the attack is very elegant, like you say. It's very simple. It actually reminds me a lot of the Scythe board game
Yeah.
combat resolution system.
Mm.
Basically, the attacker has a hidden attack value. You know they're attacking, but you don't know the strength of the attack.
There's an
Could be
element of bluffing there, right? You
Right.
don't know exactly the stats. Like every card, every attack and defense card has a number, usually somewhere between, say, 1 and 4, and an ability that might influence that number or otherwise influence the battle state either immediately or after the battle, to help shake things up a little bit.
Right. And so without those abilities, just putting those abilities aside, if I attack you with a card with an attack of 5, and you have a defense card that has a defense value of 2, then the net value gets applied to your health as damage. And then there are some cards that are just attack, just defense, or attack and defense. And in the latter case, the power applies to both. So very, very dead simple there. It's those kind of special abilities that add the secret sauce.
Yeah, like every character largely has a completely different deck. I believe there is the feint cards that are in all, most if not all of the decks. Feint basically being you cancel the effect of the opponent's cards. Like all text is and numbers are cancelled. And so that's the only thing you can really anticipate. Though once you know the opponent's characters, you might have an idea of what they're capable of, but obviously not exactly what they've got in their hand.
Right. And the characters' sats seem to have a sort of defined movement range. So the movement range might be 2 spaces or 3 spaces. And that's not by chance. It's just you can move up to that range if you want to. And you don't have to move if you don't want to move, or you can move less than the total number that you are allowed, as long as you take that maneuver roll.
So shall we talk a little bit about the roster?
Yes, let's do it, because a wide range it is. Do you want to tell us a bit about maybe the earlier sets?
Yeah, I mean, it really does cover the whole gamut of historical heroes, folk heroes, superheroes. It started out largely as public domain characters. So I think the first set was like Achilles and Alice in Wonderland. Bigfoot versus Robin Hood was the first sort of expansion box. They've since branched out into actual IP characters like the aforementioned Jurassic Park, and they just finished a big run of Marvel characters. There was, I think, 4 sort of boxes of various Marvel heroes, and a few more IPs on the way. But yeah, it really does cover this interesting friction between the sort of the big name characters and those lesser known sort of public domain characters. Because some of them are really lesser known characters from all different cultures around the world, I should say.
Right, and there was another sub-theme among the sets where because the game was originally conceived of and produced in partnership with the I don't know what you would call them. They're called literally Mondo, and I think they're known for making like movie poster art.
Yes,
for instance, like collectible art prints of new and classic films. So you mentioned, royalty-free, license-free, copyright-free IPs. Some of those are from the old black and white movie, horror universe. Like some of them might be like there's the Invisible Man, for instance, and there's Sherlock Holmes, for instance. Like those, I think there's even Frankenstein and Dracula, right?
Dracula, yes. Frankenstein, no. Though I did see that's one of the highest rated fan made characters.
You want the universal movie monsters all together, the Wolfman and all that sort of stuff. I don't know why they haven't done that. And these sets look great because they come with, well, we should mention that they come with plastic miniatures, all of them, which are like lightly, they have like a lightly applied finish to them.
They have a wash of shading over them to like make those lines pop. And then most of them are like really cool poses, very, very dynamic action poses that they do here. Some really clever miniature design.
Yeah, one of my very favorite miniatures that I've got the chance to play with is the Invisible Man. Because, as you might imagine, what do you do when showing his skin? It's just literally an empty space. So they have the jacket, the suit, the jacket, a scarf, and a hat. And the hat is just floating above this empty space. And it just does such a great job of just relaying that concept of that missing volume there. I think they did an incredible job there. Right. So I was going on to say that the production values are great, especially because all of the sets have these really striking illustrations that use mostly, these high contrast, almost monochromatic poster illustrations of all of the characters.
Yes.
And they just pop with that Mondo quality to
We didn't mention the artist earlier because there are a lot of them. I should say though that a lot of the initial art for the first couple of sets was done by Oliver Barrett, who was from Mondo and had designed a lot of those posters. So yeah, there have been a lot of other artists since, but sort of replicating that style somewhat. And very, very, as I said, only a couple of colors, a lot of black sort of shadows, sort of using symbols really cleverly as sort of more abstracted shapes, using as symbols in representing these characters. So yeah, some very striking artwork.
Yeah, I love that art style, that sort of minimal, very graphic 2D art style. And it serves all of the sets really well, even though they come from such a wide range. Like you said, they have, Sinbad versus Bigfoot versus Bruce Lee. They got the Bruce Lee license somehow versus those velociraptors from Jurassic Park. And somehow they all make them work because the graphic design is consistent and the artwork is of also a consistent quality and style. So thumbs up on the production.
It's a lovely package too. Like even the inserts, everything is a very clean sense of inserts, with each character having their own little pocket and easy to put things out, pull them out, and just set up the game in a very easy sense. Other than, of course, once you have 10 boxes of this and trying to mix and match all the various characters and pulling them off the shelf, and they're all slightly different shapes, whether they've got 2 characters or 3 or 4 in the box. So I believe there was a Kickstarter for like a collector's edition of sort of storage boxes. I haven't gone that deep. The inserts are so nice that I'd hate to actually destroy them in putting them into the collector's boxes.
Right. I took a look at the Restoration Games website today, and they featured quite a lot of Unmatched merch. So this is optional stuff. They had everything from t-shirts to socks to custom sort of deck boxes, kind of, where you can put in your cards and your minis. And they had the collector's boxes as well there. So if you really do want to spruce up your collection, you can. And you'd have to drop...
And be very stylish while doing it with your socks.
That's right. You'd have to drop a decent amount of money to collect all of these sets because, like we said, there's a ton of them.
So, should we take a step back for a second and talk about fighting games as a genre? Because this very, very much falls into that sort of head-to-head, largely 1v1. There is a team-based mode. We haven't really experimented with that. But I want to know send out your sort of history and feelings on fighting games as a genre.
Yeah, I am definitely intrigued by 1v1 games. Most of my experience comes from probably the TCG, CCG world of just 1-to-1 versus card games. That sort of milieu has existed for decades now, obviously, since the 80s, 90s, the 90s when Magic the Gathering started it all. And I played quite a few other systems since then. Skirmish games on their own, I haven't played a lot of, so I have less experience with. But the ones I have played usually are the sort of the dice rolling variety, right? Where you roll dice to see how many hits you get. I guess the closest game system that has the sort of minis per se and cards is the game from Plaid Hat, which is called Summoner Wars.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Summoner Wars. Now, Ashes, I have played that card game as well, but Summoner Wars has a grid, a very regular rectangular grid with a predefined size, and the minis per se are represented by the cards themselves. And the cards, you do have a randomized deck, you do have units, and you do have cards that you play effects, and then you have kind of tactical gameplay.
The one
played out
feels
on the
very
grid.
sort of chess-like strategy in sort of manipulating the grid and moving around and the special abilities. Yeah. This game puts in mind to me more so sort of the video game genre of fighting games, like Street Fighter, obviously being the big
Oh,
one.
interesting.
It doesn't have the mechanical difficulty in like memorizing combos, and obviously it's very much focused on the skill of can you input the buttons to punch and kick. Whereas this is more managing that hand of cards. But it has gotten me thinking about that as a genre. I've never really particularly drawn to fighting games like that, partly due to the combo memorization, but also just that head-to-head take that dynamic where you're not really building anything up. It's all about taking away from the other player. There's no sense of engine building. Whereas even in like Magic the Gathering or Keyforge, which we were discussing, you're building up a little engine, or you have a sense of having your units and sort of pushing them out and sort of growing power over the course of a match. Whereas this is only taking away, very zero sum.
Yeah, this game, like Summoner Wars, like the Magic the Gathering, does have a deck that you do shuffle. So you do have that random chance. I mean, in a video game fighting game like Street Fighter, you could always pull off the same move as your opening move, conceivably. And your opponent, if you played with them before, they might know that of you, and then that you might need to shake it up and change things around. So that game is largely, yes, a game of twitch and performance, but it's also sort of a game of mind games, right? Getting inside the head,
knowing your
of your
opponent,
opponent,
and like knowing both the player and the character they're playing as.
Right. Now, I suppose there would be an aspect of that if, for instance, you and I, or maybe say me and my oldest kid, say we had a set and there was only 3 fighters in that set. Well, we'd probably eventually find our favorites and pit them against each other and say, hey, that's not fair. You always win with this player. Why don't we switch it around? And then, maybe the other side would learn the ins and outs of that fighter set too. But you still have the randomness of the cards, so you can't guarantee that you can pull off the same strategy precisely at the beginning of every single game.
Yeah, there definitely doesn't seem to be the same culture of maining a character. Like, oh, I'm a what's the Street Fighter character?
Ryu.
So
Blanka.
Yeah. I'm a Blanka main, or I'm a Mario main in Super Smash Brothers, right? Whereas this Unmatched very much encourages you to sort of try different characters, mix and match, and constantly be discovering new combinations and experimenting, rather than doubling down on just mastering one character.
Yeah, the cool thing about Unmatched is because it has so many expansions, I could see how older sets could become interesting when newer sets come out and you want to pit an old favorite against a new discovery, so to speak. And that was really interesting when we pitted some of those older fighter sets against the new cooperative set. I'm sure they didn't play test every combination, but there were some interesting combinations and interactions between the sets and the new cooperative mechanics.
I think they have play tested all of these. No, they haven't play tested every combination, obviously, but they have play tested overall sort of archetypes. I was listening to it was an interesting podcast on the Ludology Podcast with Brian Neff. I think it's one of the developers, talking about balance and how they do that. Like certain characters, you can sort of group characters into certain archetypes and playtest them broadly against each other that way. But also balance not being a huge priority, because the amount of super players who are going to be going to the degree that you're caring about that high level balance is such a small percentage of the number of players who are mostly just, hey, let's grab 2 and smash them together like action figures, right? It's not really a big priority. The feeling of being fair and balance is not necessarily as important as the objective balance. But there are a lot of stats for this game that are being tracked pretty interestingly. There's various tier lists, as I'm sure you can guess. They will admit that certain characters are just stronger than others, right? Electra and Bigfoot, I think, are the 2 standouts. They're just generally stronger than any other characters. They will win more matches by percentage.
Yeah, I think I used to listen to the Plaid Hat podcast podcast of that particular game studio, and they would talk about how they would informally do numbers, stats to see how many wins would come out of this faction versus that faction during playtesting. And of course, that became a whole lot easier once they released their digital app, which they have on mobile devices for pitting the factions against each other. They can just track that across the board. So that becomes a very powerful tool to determine that there is balance. If you care about those things, I don't think I'll ever become a high-level player of Street Fighter or Unmatched enough to sort of care. Yeah, I'm more interested in just pitting this against that and seeing who would win. It's sort of baked into the theme of the game.
Yeah,
Like
this game is that the strength of this game is really in that discoverability, both in each character and in matching them up with other characters. I don't know what the number of potential combinations are, but it's growing month by month with all these new features and all the fan made characters. There's a huge list of those that they can't officially approve of, but they're supporting it in some interesting ways with a lot of fan contests. So the trick with this game is that it's the discoverability of playing two new characters, right? And one of the best things is that the strategy, you pick up a new character, you grab Dracula, and looking through his cards, it's pretty self-evident and emergent what the strategy of him should be, right?
Right.
I've got all these cards that want my brides to be adjacent to as many characters as possible, and regaining health, for example. But you won't necessarily see the full sort of strength of that. The sort of the strategy you can use with them on the first game. So there's this really fine balance between like trying to find what they're good at over several matches against new characters without losing some of that replayability. Because once you've discovered it, there's not really like once you've discovered what a character is good at, there's only so many ways it's going to express itself, right? Other than through the luck.
Yeah.
There's a tough balance here between replayability and sort of that emergent discoverability.
Right. So if in say Magic the Gathering, say if somebody put together a deck for you, you didn't put it together yourself, but somebody customized a deck.
Or you buy one of the pre-made decks.
Or you buy a pre-made deck, and they hand it to you, and then they coach you. They say, hey, you know what, pal? You're new to this game. Oh, I hand you this deck. It's a burn deck. All right, so here are the strategies. Or here's a white weenie deck, or something like that. They can encapsulate the sort of the strategy, the intended strategy of the deck in one sentence. And in the very same way, with this game, you can encapsulate the strategy of a fighter, like the Invisible Man, who would use his fog tokens to sort of jump, hit and run, fade into the mist, and escape counterattack. And likewise, the Velociraptors is coordinate attacks with your fellow raptors, surround the enemies for stronger blows. Right? Very, very, very simple. So you can explain easily. A lot of the sets also, you see the cards over and over. I think they have multiple copies of each card. And I think, like Magic the Gathering, there's a limit of like 3 or 4 copies of each card in a given deck. So, really, the unique cards in a deck are probably only a dozen or 15. It's not really that overwhelming to encounter. So I think you could master a deck in like 2 plays.
Yeah.
Or 3 plays.
Yeah, I think it's suggested that the best of 3 is basically the best format here. So you'll by the end of those 3 matches, you'll basically know exactly how this character plays. But beyond that, there's kind of diminishing returns on seeing any sort of new developments other than the luck of what you draw and improvising with that hand.
Yeah, and that's sort of what brings my opinion of this game sort of down a notch, is that the lack of customization and the lack of deck building, so to speak, because I haven't followed the custom deck, custom fighter sets, whatever Discord groups or whatnot. I don't follow that discourse. So to me, the lack of customization is a bit of a turnoff, which is interesting even to myself when I think about it, because like I don't go for the chase in, modern TCGs. I don't follow Magic. I don't follow Lorcana. I don't follow any of those things except the digital ones, which are free to play. so it's no skin off my back. But I do enjoy the customization. I enjoy customization, but I also enjoy games that have preset decks like Keyforge. I love Keyforge. I'll play that almost anytime anyone
That's also
asks
had that
me.
degree of discoverability, right? And figuring out this is how this deck works.
Right. But I would probably be happy playing with 3 or 4 decks in that game for the rest of my life because I guess the variety of cards are wider. The variety of mechanisms are wider. And the sort of the activities, combinations, and engine building that you can accomplish in those card-based games, I feel like the design space is broader than what you can accomplish in this very simplistic sort of two-person skirmish game.
We do have that sense of actually building up, like deploying units, powering up, racing towards particular objectives rather than just one-on-one punching each other back and forth, right? It's interesting because I've been reading about the Magic the Gathering archetypes of Jimmy, Johnny, and Spike, and sort of what drives a player to. Well, what do they get out of these games, right? I don't think it entirely maps onto Unmatched here, but it's interesting to think about in terms of like, is it power? Is that sort of competitive power level, or is it the form of expression? But like their expression can come through multiple ways. I think it was Johnny was the sort of expressive player. You can do that through customization and deck building, but also just in expressive strategy and the range of options and how you choose to deploy that. And which I think this is really missing Unmatched a little bit. Just needs there's not much strategy there. There's not a lot of depth to how you interact.
Right. Basically the verb set is very, very narrow. There's only so many things you can do. Is you can kind of punch and block and sort of dodge and weave and sort of gang up, and your options are very limited. Whereas in Magic the Gathering, Keyforge, other games like that, the types of things that you can do are so much the more broader. Even in Magic, although you are trying to achieve the same thing, bring your opponent's health down to 0, you can win the game in other ways, like forcing the player to draw when there's no cards in their deck. Or burning...
you can't do that here. Apparently, Electra, one of the reasons that she is very good is that she can just basically... It's like that scene in Monty Python where you just run away until the other person gets tired and collapses. Electra can basically do that.
Very nice. But I don't know. I've not seen that occur. Yeah, so I don't know what it is about this game. There's so many things that are great about it. All that, just that polish is there. I generally am a fan of easy to teach, easy to learn games, and I have enjoyed most of the games I've played with this.
I think that's one of the key things is that at its best, this game is really strong. Like when you get 2 well-matched heroes, it feels like a great cat and mouse game. Like they feel like they're either a Marvel fighter. I was thinking of the movie Van Helsing, where like the 2 characters fighting, but like one's always like pulling back to like stepping back to throw some quips and insults at the other character. And then they start punching again, and they step back and sort of repositioning and stepping in and out of the fight in some really dynamic ways. And that game can feel like that. But other times it just feels like cat and cat with 2 characters just rushing straight in and until someone has no cards left and they win, right? It's like that. What's the other Marvel? I think it's in Endgame where you see the 2 armies just rushing at each other and they start punching, and that's it. Like, and some people love that. Hey, no shade to people who love that kind of Marvel action, but I need something a little more dynamic, strategy wise for myself.
Yeah, and this could be just that sort of like lightweight beer and pretzels game that a couple, family, 2 friends could enjoy very easily, especially if they had, at least enough variety. Maybe they have one of the sets that has 4 characters and then they added another 2. Then the number of combinations that you can have are much greater. And that you won't get so tired because you will switch between the characters, you'll get different matchups, and the fun comes in just seeing what's the sort of where the sparks fly when you compare these mechanics versus those. So I could see that working really well and being enjoyable. I mean, I couldn't see myself collecting dozens and dozens of these sets or every single one, but I could see how someone would. They are attractive sets. They're eminently playable. This game is very easy to teach, so you could easily bring someone up to speed, especially like a young person or someone that's new to games. And the basics are so easy. Be easy to convince them once they played a couple games to try a different faction, because the step up to learn what's beyond the basics isn't so tough.
Yeah, and there's so many characters here. There's bound to be something for everyone, right? If you're a Marvel head, there's like almost 20 characters just Marvel, right? And you could just have an entire Marvel game there, or you could jump into those deep dive historical figures and see whether so like Sun Wukong would beat Achilles and that sort of the classics. It feels like some of those Asylum films that you get, like Mega Shark versus Giant Squid, or the Kaiju films, like King Kong versus Gamera and things like that, and just like that's the eternal question: who would win, right?
Yeah, too bad the scale is off, because you couldn't have Dracula fight with Godzilla. I don't think just the scale of that exactly works.
I did see King Kong is entering the public domain in just a few years, so not far off.
It makes sense. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the traditional game, but we haven't really talked about the new sets with the cooperative mechanism. Should we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it was last year, 2023, they released Unmatched Tales to Amaze. So this is a standalone product with four heroes and two sort of mega villains. And so those heroes they are compatible with the previous game. You can just pop those out and mix and match them with any other character. You can bring other characters into the cooperative version. The only parts that aren't compatible is those two villains and the sort of minions that they control, but more on that later. So I should say, just in full disclosure, I did receive a review copy of Tales to Amaze. My pre-existing Unmatched collection was my own, so obviously having that large collection of options to pull from does make it a better proposition, right? And in terms of already having all those characters you can pull in.
Right, and I will say all of the fighter sets are very memorable. For instance, I was going back years now, I guess 5 years since the game originally came out, and I was trying to remember on my fingers how many fighters I had played. And I played at least 5, because I could remember every single one. I played Velociraptors most recently, the Invisible Man, Sherlock Holmes and Watson, Squirrel Girl from one of the Marvel sets, and the Golden Bat on another occasion, who is from Tales to Amaze, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Right. So the Golden Bat being I guess a kind of a Chinese superhero of old.
I think so. That's one of the coolest elements of this. Like the Tales of Amaze especially really gets into the deep dives of some of these characters. Golden Bat, apparently the first ever superhero from the paper theater days.
Yeah, I guess even before like the Shadow, I think is the first sort of American style superhero from the radio days.
And the highlight being Annie Christmas, who's like this 7-foot boat captain from like the American South, folktale hero. She punches real good. That's the thing. She punches things. So yeah, I wasn't familiar with either of those characters. You've also got Nikola Tesla, eternally trapped in the world of steampunk now.
Right.
And
co-opted.
Jill Trent, who I believe was like a pulp fiction detective novel.
There's even like a Shakespeare set, right? With like William Shakespeare himself, the playwright, plus also his fictional creations.
The Weird Sisters from Macbeth are there. Hamlet and another one I'm forgetting.
Yeah, so real strange combos. I was saying all that to say that the antagonists in the Tales to Amaze set are really interesting. So it's not a spoiler, right? We can talk about all of them?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there's two main ones. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's like the alien, so the Mars Attacks kind of alien. What
The
is
Martian
it?
Invader is the official title, but it's
Right.
basically a giant UFO
It's like a saucer.
that's hovering over the cornfields.
Right. And what was the other one again? Was it like a Mothman or something?
The Mothman, yeah. So I've been playing a lot of Fallout New Vegas. I've been mentioning recently, and so I'm a big fan of Mothman. And like I'd love to be able to play as him. I have conflicted feelings about having to fight him. But yeah, they're very cool miniatures. So those two basically they tower over the others. Like they're literally twice as tall as the player characters. They're huge, imposing figures.
And the cooperative set and map is also huge. It's like literally
Mm.
4 times, if not more, the size of kind of your standard 1v1 maps as well. So that's a brand new experience. It's
Yeah, so
much more
just
expensive.
Yes. So just to quickly run down how this works differently, and it's not that differently. Basically, how you're playing your heroes is going to be exactly the same. Interspersed with that, you're going to have one of those giant villains. You're going to have a number of sort of sub minions, other cryptological creatures. You got the Jersey Devil. You got the unfortunately named Skunk Ape. You've got the tarantula. You're going to have one of those per player, basically randomly selected, scattered around, and basically they each have their own decks. It's going to have a mix of various attacks. There's an initiative deck that randomizes the turn order. So each player and each villain and minion has their own card. You shuffle it up and draw them out, and so determine the turn order. And there's also these doom tokens. Largely, those villains are just going moving to the closest hero and punching them, right? But in between that, there are various effects through cards and sort of end of turn effects that will be placing out doom tokens, sort of triggering this secondary cascade of bad stuff to be happening.
Right. This the turn order tokens reminded me a great deal of another sort of co-op card tactical game called Eon's End. Do you know Eon's End at all?
Yes, I played that a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that game has basically like a token for each of your heroes and a token for the big bad, of which you always play with one, the sort of one overriding big bad of each session that you play, very much like this. And there aren't tokens for the minions, but the big bad usually acts twice within a combat round. So that is very much the same here. And I really appreciated the sort of the minion designs of these sets. And I suppose those are kind of intended to balance the challenge for multiple players, right? The player count. You have more players, more minions, making more trouble that you have to basically keep under control. And the aliens the goal are different from the Mothman too, right?
Slightly, yeah. That's one of the trickier things I found. Like they're both placing out doom tokens in slightly different ways. Mothman hates bridges. He's always attacking the bridges. The Martian invader he's placing little green men into the crops to make rude signs and with the crop signs. I don't know what he's trying to do there, but
cornfields. It's constant playground for alien invaders.
The way you remove them is just like it's different, but it's only slightly so that I'm always having to refer back to the rules every time to remember. Like, is it when you maneuver you get a free one? Is it like there's slightly different variations that is just different enough that makes it quite a little confusing. I would have liked to have like a reminder on the board for each side, just to like what's unique about this one specific one.
Right. And you and I have at least played each of those monsters at least once. I recall playing them both with you. And we played the Martian invaders more recently, and I thought that goal, that theme, I guess, was a little bit more evocative.
Yes.
I think maybe even you were comparing it to something like a sci-fi movie version of Pandemic, essentially. It's like the cornfields were getting overrun by little green men tokens who you didn't inherently play, but they were sort of tokens that represented the influence of the invaders. It was actually the Martian saucer that you had to hunt down and hit with fisticuffs.
Your main objective is just defeat the villain. You don't even have to defeat those minions. It's just take down the big bad, and that's it. And the minions and the doom is just there to sort of slow you down and distract you. And in that sense, again, this so often can still come down to just rushing at the enemy and punch them. There's very little reason to be exploring the map, especially even when there are Doom tokens. It often takes you have to go so far out of your way to do anything about it. It's often just easier to avoid them and still just punch the big bad anyway, depending on what hero you are and what your maneuverability is. So you often have a lot of options as to how you approach this. But obviously, you've got somewhere between 1 and 4 heroes on the board. How those interact is now a whole other scale of sort of synergy, in that they're combining their abilities to work together in some interesting ways.
I will just say that if you try the combination I tried, Velociraptors against the Martian ship, it was really quite humorous. I don't know if
the
it
game
was
happened to teleport him right in front of you, and he was already surrounded. It's like, you came to the wrong neighborhood, buddy.
Exactly. Basically, he just hovered into the pit right between all 3 of my Velociraptors. And of course, my faction ability is you gain increased damage for each of your fellow brothers and sisters that are part of your hunting pack. So I was delivering these ridiculously overpowered blows, and basically took out like a couple of the threats really early on, and that was quite a simple effort for us to finish that match.
So to roll it back to that talk of the initiative deck, and that does add a high degree of sort of unpredictability, but that's about it, because everything else in this is largely pretty predictable, both in that the characters will move towards the closest opponent and punch them. You don't know what the card text will be exactly, but you know their behavior is just going to be move and punch. Tiebreakers, like if there's a tie between the 2 closest opponents, players decide all tiebreakers. So you have quite a lot of agency in how you decide to set this up. And I'm not saying that it makes it easier, but it's definitely quite predictable. You've got quite a lot of opportunities to sort of position yourself to deal with these threats accordingly.
Yeah, maybe the only other random element was the card or some sort of effect that told us to place alien creatures in the field with the lowest number that was empty, or something to that effect.
Yeah, but you know it's going to be somewhere this round that field 2 is going to get a bunch of aliens, basically.
Right, so that basically forced us to shuffle around the larger board a little bit, but it never felt... It felt a tiny bit crowded at certain choke points, I will say that.
Everyone does tend to congregate in one area. Like I said, just it partly depends on the maneuverability of your heroes, but it's largely going to end up in everyone just rushing in and punching each other, right? And again, I don't feel like it's taking full advantage of the map and the size, especially like playing this solo. Especially like I think the first time I played it, this was Any Christmas versus Mothman. 1 figure each, they move and they fight, and that's it. I mean, you got the minions there too, but you're not really taking advantage of that board in any interesting way. I've heard, we didn't play it at 4 players. I think we played it at 3 a couple of times, but at 4 I've heard not that it's crowded, just that it's become so chaotic and messy that like if you draw off 4 minions in one go, they can just take out another player before they even have a chance to take a turn. So that really the sweet spot for this is pretty slim. You really want to be playing this at 2 or 3 probably still, where you at least have some interactions with the characters and how they can interact. One of the better things I will say is how you get these emergent roles. Because you can synergize, you'll end up in these positions like, oh, well, someone will inherently be the tank, someone will be a healer. Like Any Christmas, obviously the tank, she wants to take hits. Nikola Tesla, I think, can heal a little bit, and then Golden Bat is like your DPS. And so you fall into these roles where you can position Any Christmas to always be the one that she's going to get rushed, because you can make those decisions and break those ties.
Right. So like an RPG, you want a party that has a variety of specialties to cover all the bases. If, of course, all of you are playing tanks, then you're all going to need to be up in the bad guy's grill, and that's the only strategy you got. But if you have a ranged fighter, which I don't think either of us played last time, then we would probably use a little bit more of the board space, because we don't have to get right up front. So yeah, that a little bit is on us as the players to choose what factions to play as.
Yeah, I think like largely this game is at its best when you've got multiple characters, like the Velociraptors who have multiple figures, or some of the others who have minions, like Robin Hood has a whole bunch of merry men following him around to take hits. Broadly, this game is more interesting the more pieces you have on the board, right? The more opportunities to manipulate things and come up with clever strategies and synergies with each other, and actually be taking advantage of that space.
Right. Dracula has the three sisters, you said. I think Sherlock Holmes has Watson, so one companion. And there's even not exactly companions, but there's little gimmicks that some characters have, like the Invisible Man that I mentioned before. He has 3 fog tokens, which you can place throughout the map, and they don't stop fighters from going in them. They give you certain advantages as the Invisible Man if you start on them or move into them. So that sort of adds another layer of strategy that I really enjoyed. So it didn't have to come with managing more fighters per se, but I like those factions, those fighters that do something a little bit different.
Yeah. So I don't want to be too negative on this. It does give you that additional. You're still getting that effect of like, oh, what happens if these two team up instead of fighting each other, right? But Batman and Joker now are fighting together against a bigger enemy. Strategically, it doesn't really scratch much of an itch for me, but it does still let you let you explore that full roster of what if characters in some fun ways. And again, very accessible and sort of aesthetically excellent products. And again, just that high degree of compatibility. Like you could just buy this just for those 4 characters to play them in regular Unmatched. You've got a lot of compatibility both back and forth with how you use these characters.
Right, and the aforementioned theme sets that work together, like the 4 or so Marvel sets, you could really play for a long time with just those 4 sets. I mean, it's a decent amount of money you have to drop, but they have everything in them that you need to play. And I don't think we mentioned that most of the sets, not the very smallest ones, but most of the sets come with their own sort of like battlefield or arena.
Yes, different maps, yeah.
That's theme appropriate to the fighters that belong to that set. Like Cobble and Fog is the kind of 19th century England Jack the Ripper sort of Sherlock Holmes action. The Marvel sets we mentioned. I think the InGen versus Velociraptors is kind of like a jungle Jurassic Park sort of setting. So the maps also add a degree of variety. Not that much, but it's nice that they're there.
A lot of them will have an extra little twist or quirk to how they work, but I've never really found most games to take advantage of that. Again, with the exception of some characters, most just aren't taking advantage of the spatial elements of this game. And not to say that I'd prefer this map not be there at all. But I like to explore some fun ways to force characters to move around a bit more. Like you could do the Smash Brothers concept of like having items that power you up. Another factor of mixing and matching some different abilities, perhaps.
Right. Maybe they'll create some supervillain sets for Marvel that they can add even more variety of where the villains can affect the overall board space, introduce some traps or something like that.
Well, there is
exciting.
Is it coming to Kickstarter soon? I think there is another cooperative box set coming that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That sounds exciting. They're superheroes in their own right. Maybe you can have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles up against Daredevil and Elektra. That would be a great combo.
The fight battle for the New York sewers.
Exactly. Above ground and underground.
The one other new set that's just been announced, I believe coming straight to retail is just a regular set, is there's 2 boxes of characters from the Witcher series.
Very exciting.
Unfortunately, I'm a little bummed out. Roach. They're really missing out on the opportunity on having Roach as a fighter.
Yeah, that is straight up horse.
That's the horse, but yeah, no. So is that everything we wanted to talk about for Tales to Amaze?
Well, I should mention, so the Unmatched series, I don't know if I'm ever going to become an enthusiast. I like it enough. It's pleasant. It's beautiful to look at, but I just don't have the qualities of the collector to want to get all of these sets. I thought Tales to Amaze was a really impressive production.
Yes.
The great graphic design and the great artistry goes into all parts of this game, of this set, not just in the fighters and the decks, but even in the little pieces like the tokens that go along with the monsters, with the minions, and the initiative order cards, the new board, all of them just really fit well. They really gel with the Unmatched universe. So I was super impressed with that.
Yeah, I mean, they are lovely artifacts and production design, graphic design across the board. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit of empty calories for me in terms of the actual gameplay. It's just never quite gotten so its hooks into me, unfortunately.
Right. Well, if you're a lapsed player, maybe this cooperative set or these two cooperative sets will draw you back in and give you a little more variety.
If you didn't gel with the sort of that head-to-head take that element, I think this is another opportunity to explore and mix and match all those that huge range of characters in fun new ways.
Great. Yeah, happy to leave it there.
Well, we did have one question from recent guest of the pod, Dennis Ryan, sent us in a question and said, Unmatched is the game that lets you play out that classic schoolyard question, who'd win in a fight between so-and-so and so-and-so? Who is our dream character or license you'd like to see added to the game?
That's probably would have to come something in the video game geekdom or comic book space. I mean, I'm glad that those other Marvel characters are there, but I'm a bit more of a X-Men fan. 90s X-Men fan, so I'd really love to see Wolverine versus Deadpool versus Cable or something like that.
Deadpool is a character. Deadpool is, and there was a standalone. Listening to that Ludology podcast, I did mention that they wanted X-Men, but it was a rights issue with the Sony shenanigans going on there.
Right, so that would be great. I would also like to see something that's maybe even more straight up fighting game oriented. Like, why can't we have Street Fighter characters?
Ken versus Ryu?
That would be pretty much the same deck against the same deck.
Well,
you could have Ken versus Chun-Li or Guile or Blanca, E Honda, some of those more varied fighters in there. That'd be a great themed set, and people would snatch it up like crazy.
Oh yeah, no, that'd be an instant buy for a lot of people. Yeah,
love to see that.
Yeah, I saw Hellboy was one of the fan-made characters, and that's right up my alley. You have your Hellboy and your Abe Sapien. That would fit into the aesthetics. Like that Mike Mignola art style would fit right into that sort of the artistic design of this series, I think.
Very graphic novel and also cinematic because of the Hellboy film series.
If you're talking public domain, now you'd technically be allowed to have Winnie the Pooh versus Mickey Mouse. You could have a little smackdown there.
Only Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse, though, so it'd have to be on the river. There you go. We also failed to mention that there is a digital set of Unmatched available for Steam, and I think just PC platforms, but it doesn't
I think on phone as well.
Okay, that's cool. But it doesn't come with any of the licensed factions, so you're not going to see Jurassic Park, you're not going to see Marvel characters, but you will see Sherlock Holmes and Bigfoot and all those other.
In some ways, I kind of prefer that. They just keep the IP out of it. Let's just keep this in its little public domain universe.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's just sad that not all of the factions are available, right?
I mean, personally, just I'm completely burnt out on Marvel personally, and none of the other IPs they've used so far have really spoken to me. Jurassic Park's pretty cool, I will say. Just rewatch that movie. So, but otherwise, I'm not really in it for the licensing.
Yeah, it's not really the licensing for me either. It's just about the strange juxtaposition. It's sort of like your G.I. Joes fighting with your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fighting with your Barbies. It's just like there's something inherently interesting about that.
Smashing those action figures together and always gonna have a good time.
There you go.
Okay, should we leave it there?
Yeah, let's leave Unmatched and talk about maybe the next game we're going to be covering.
Yeah, so we're going back to the digital realm. So I think we've already had a little bit of a hint on this game. Next up, our featured episode will be on Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn.
That's right. That's on Xbox Game Pass right now. It's a relatively new game, and I won't say anything more about it because I have to finish it. I think you're almost done, right?
Just about, yeah. I nearly mentioned it because I know you and Ryan talked about it briefly. But I'm about to wrap it up with some interesting thoughts in that. I did discuss it previously when it was a demo, I believe, and it left some strong first impressions. So I'll leave it at that. So that's our next episode. Or that's our next featured game. Our next episode, we'll be back with another playlist.
That's right. So if you do have access to Xbox Game Pass, apparently Flintlock is not that long. So please, if you're hearing us, please follow along, play the game, and let us know what you think about it.
Yeah, and let us know what you think of Unmatched. Who would you like to see join the ranks? What's your favorite? Who do you mean? So you can join the club at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at omnigamers.club.
Yeah, and you can always check us out on YouTube. Those episodes are going up without interruption. And if you have a friend you know in person that does listen to this podcast or should listen to this podcast, tell them to check their podcast feed for the there might be
their
two
phone and subscribe them.
Exactly. There might be two Omnigamers Club podcast feeds. Tell them to subscribe to all of them. And the newest episode after we changed feeds was August 28th. So look out for that.
And so, as I previously said, we don't often beg for ratings and reviews, but right now it's especially important as we try to rebuild this thing. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Mark, for all your hard work trying to rebuild that feed.
I just feel a little boneheaded because of those technical issues, but we're just rolling with this thing, like you said, for the love of the game.
Absolutely. Okay, well, should we get back to it?
That's right. Back to playing games. But until next time, I hope you all listening have a balanced diet of games.
Bye.
Bye.